Birdwatchers. I'm Nikhil Mehta. With me always is Daniel Rotter. And I wish that we could be talking about something more exciting than the Orioles wildcard loss to the Royals. Just devastating. Dropped both games at home, scored one run across 18 innings. I really hesitate to say this about a team that I love, but offensively, just pathetic. Just unbelievable to watch a team with so much talent fail so spectacularly on offense. Reagans is a good pitcher. Lugo is not that good. Lugo is not good enough to have shut down this team, nor is their bullpen good enough to have shut down this team the way they did. Um, just a ton of disappointment, Daniel. I don't think there's any other way to say it. I think we had hope on our podcast, our playoff preview podcast. We had hope. They won 5 of their last 6. We felt good about the starting pitchers. The bats showed a little bit of life. We were only right about one of those two things, and that was the starting pitching. Held the Royals to 3 runs across 2 games, which is really what we asked of the pitching staff. If they could do that in the wild card, then the bats should be able to take care of the rest, and they just couldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for all you listeners out there, I'll have you know that Nikhil and I were present at both games. We were part of the small contingent that tried to fill Camden Yards during these tough weekday afternoon games. So we were right there to witness the misery in person. Yeah, it was really tough to watch, but I think on our last podcast, I also kind of expressed some doubt as to how much I really did believe in this team. I remember you asked Nikhil, is this team getting hot at the right time? And I kind of balked at saying yes, because I thought, well, down the stretch when we did get those 5 wins in the last week, I was like, well, Emmanuel Rivera was playing great, James McCann was playing great, but it still kind of seemed like a lot of our main key contributors were not necessarily at that level of getting hot at the right time. And I kind of, almost reluctantly said that I thought we were going to win just because I thought we were more talented. And I figured, well, gosh, last year went so bad. We got to have some kind of fire under our asses to want to win this game, win this series. And man, it didn't happen. And, it was a spectacular failure, honestly. And certainly the approach to this offseason will be, this is no longer a fluke that we've lost in the playoffs. What can we take away from this and assure that we are winning playoff games next year? Because I don't even think, obviously, like, oh, let's just win a playoff game, blah, blah, blah. But no, we need to make a run in the playoffs next year, I think, for fans to be, pleased with what they're seeing.
Yeah, you mentioned the crowd size, which there was so much commentary about that, and I felt like it was only coming from people who their living, like their jobs and or their lives are entirely built around sports. And that's pretty true of me. That's pretty true of you. But that is not the case for everyone. Even big Orioles fans, like, they have jobs that they just can't call out of. They have kids. They have to get downtown in the middle of the week. It's not as easy as people made it out to be. And I didn't feel like the place was missing any energy because it wasn't completely full. You'd love a sold out, completely packed wild card game. I also kind of like that it gave probably a good amount of people a chance to go to the game that didn't think they were going to be able to, not because of time issues, but because of financial issues. So that's just a little side note. I felt like the home crowd was plenty there. But yeah, I think you really hit it. No postseason wins in the last 10 years. And so now it's getting to the feeling that even one next year won't be enough. There was a feeling, at least I felt this way on Wednesday, that if they could figure out a way to pull out that, just pull out Wednesday's game and at least get to Thursday, that you'd feel a whole lot better because you'd get that one win in 10 years. But next year, if they win one game and lose 2 in a wild card series, no one's going to be happy because it's not enough for where this team is. We can go through these 2 games really quickly. I don't want to rehash the whole thing. Cole Reagans shut the Orioles down for 6 innings before turning it over to the bullpen. Sam Long, Chris Bubich, and Lucas Urseg. The Corbin Burns was lights out. He allowed 1 run. That was it. He was brilliant. People criticized the decision to pitch to Bobby Witt in that situation. I go back and forth on that. I think, one, I don't think there's any way that Brandon Hyde is going to get Corbin Burns to pitch around Bobby Witt. I think that Corbin Burns may decide to pitch around Bobby Witt. I don't think there's any way that Hyde could have gotten his veteran pitcher to not try and take down one of the best hitters in the game. Like that is the moment that everyone gets paid for. That's the moment that is worth the price of admission alone. Um, that one decision, potentially questionable aside, Burns was completely lights out. Exactly what we asked of him. In fact, letting him go into the eighth, I thought was a little bit surprising, but really fantastic of Hyde to just say, "Look, you're the best pitcher in the. You're our best pitcher. We're gonna winner. We are going to trust you into the eighth inning." And his performance was just incredible.
Yeah, it absolutely was incredible, and you got that bulldog mentality sense from Corbin Burns the whole game. He was incredibly efficient, which I mean I think that kind of does in a sense play to what those weaknesses we thought Burns might have, like as far as contract negotiation into the offseason, how much he gets paid is that his strikeouts have been down this year, and he really did not miss a lot of bats in the game, but because he was giving up so much weak contact, his pitch count was incredibly low. He was getting outs early in counts. And while we pulled him in the eighth, or sorry, when we pulled him in, I believe, the beginning of the ninth inning, we really didn't even have to. I think we just did to give the Royals an extra look because, we wanted to make sure they didn't tack any other on it and let them get too comfortable in the box there. But I mean, Burns theoretically probably could have pitched 10 innings with the rate that he was going and been all right. I think we just wanted to kind of switch things up. But on the other side of things, Cole Reagans, he was kind of the opposite of what we were seeing. He was a little bit less efficient with his pitch count, but he was generating a lot of swings and misses. He only went 6 innings before exiting a little bit early. Even I think he had was it a calf issue or was that Scoople? I know him and Scoople both left for like little tweak reasons or something in their wild card starts. But I mean, Cole Reagans had 15 swings and misses in his 6 innings. Burns had 6 swings and misses in his 8+ innings. So while Burns was generating a lot of weak contact and got through it, I mean, we were having trouble even just putting the ball in play consistently against Reagans, which again, it limits, limiting batted ball opportunities limits the amount of chances you have to score runs. And I think that's kind of been the thing that we've been talking about all second half of this team is we're limiting, batted ball opportunities by striking out so much and even like weak contact with low expected batting averages. And that just, we really saw that in this Royals game in game one. If you look at top exit velocities, the Royals had 4 of the top 5 batted ball exit velocities in the game. The one that we had was that long Jordan Westburg flyout that was hit to the cutout in the left field wall. But we really had a chance in game one, which sucks. And I don't want to, get too much into it all by myself. But MJ Melendez really tried to hand us a run in game one by misplaying that ball. And we couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah. I think they had the opportunity in game one. And they had the opportunity in game two, right after Cedric Mullins' home run in the sixth inning or in the fifth inning. They loaded the bases with no outs and they walked out with no runs. And it was at that moment that I was like, they don't deserve to win this game. They don't deserve to advance. They don't belong in the postseason. If you have the bases loaded with no outs and you can't get in a single run, the moment was too big for you. You don't belong there, and that was true in that game. Lugo was not great in game two. They got 5 hits and a walk off him in 4 1/3 innings. But again, stranded runners, let them get out of issues. 2 pitchers, Angel Zerpa and John Schreiber, who were 2 middle relievers in the Royals pen, got 2 strikeouts each in game two in 1 inning of work, and then they turned it back over to Long, Bubich, and Ursig to close it out. Who the Orioles had seen the night before and could only get one hit and 1 run off of in 2 2/3 inning. I was saving to talk about the Orioles lineup in the first game because I wanted to look at the stats combined. Gunnar 0 for 3 first night, 0 for 7 with 2 walks. So he had 2 walks, but he was otherwise 0 for 7. Westberg 1 for 6 with a walk. Santander 1 for 8. Mountcastle was that 0 for 7. Rutschman
ugly
1 for 8. Yeah. Rutschman 1 for 8. Even Cowser was 1 for 7. The guys that produced Arias, O'Hearn was 1 for 2 with a walk. Slater had a hit. Mullins had the home run. Arias had a hit on both nights. Mullins had 2 hits the first night and a home run the second. I mean, those are the guys that cannot be carrying your offense. Like those getting contributions from, Mullins and Arias is great, but when that happens at the bottom lineup and you can't turn it around to anything at the top, you've wasted guys that who are not hitting as well or not supposed to hit as well, actually setting the plate for Gunnar and Westberg and Santander, and they just did nothing. And that to me was the epitome of the Orioles second half. It was the epitome of this series. That inning, that bases loaded inning. I mean, I don't really have much else to say about game two. I mean, Eflin was really good in 4 innings. Probably could have come out for that fifth. But the Orioles relievers battled through the rest of the game. Hyde felt like he was pulling not necessarily the right lever, but the lever that would work just enough in that moment. Um, I'm not a big Hyde out guy. I do think that he felt desperate in game two because he was not getting anything out of his offense, and he felt desperate to the point of using up everything he had in the pen because he needed to keep that game as low scoring as possible. And Perez came on, gave up the run. Would you prefer Perez comes in, every reliever comes in and is lights out the way that they were for KC? Of course, but you're not guaranteed that. You're not guaranteed that in the postseason. So I don't really fault Hyde too much for his decisions. And I don't really fault the pitching staff, the bullpen at all, even CNL for giving up that run.
All right, so I have a lot to unpack. We went through a lot there in game two. The first thing being you started by saying that the moment seemed too big for our offense, and there was no greater moment where the moment seemed too big than when Colton Cowser broke his wrist on a strikeout. I mean, that was the most demoralizing at bat I think I've ever seen. Um, in a playoff game, honestly, like you want to talk about making up your mind, you're going to swing before you even see the pitch. Like, I mean, I guess he thought it was going to break back over the plate as a slider, but I mean, man, that was ugly, ugly, ugly. And on the topic of ugly, many Ryan Mountcastle at bats were ugly, man. Like, looked like he had no clue what was coming, just uncompetitive after uncompetitive at bat for him. And I think that he's in an interesting spot, not to get too, far into our offseason plans, because I'm not exactly sure where he stands on this team. And especially a, short 7-game sample size where he looked as bad in the playoffs might really rub some people in this organization the wrong way. And with Kobe Mayo's ascension, we'll see what happens with him. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we kept him. I just think it wasn't a good look. Yeah, I mean, Gunnar, where were you, man? 3 strikeouts in game two. I know he drew that walk and he hit, I think he tagged one ball decently hard. But yeah, non-existent. Adley was the same Adley pretty much that we continue to see all second half. I know he got one base hit. But really, I mean, as far as the hitting goes, I look at it like this. Cedric Mullins, my hat's off to him. He had a tremendous 2-game series, played
Mm-hmm.
great, was really our only good hitter in the lineup. Ramon Arias, thumbs up, because I think he did plenty for what I expect from Ramon Arias with the bat. He gave us competitive at bats. I think he got a hit in each game at least. So he did a good job. And I think O'Hearn and Slater off the bench both did good jobs when they shuffled in also. And O'Hearn got a hit when he started game two as well. But everyone else on offense, it was bad. It was a lot of swings and misses, a lot of striking out, and a lot of weak contact, and not doing anything with runners in scoring position. As far as
Yeah, I
the
mean,
pitching in game two went, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just gonna say you could argue Gunnar, Westberg, Santander, Rutschman should be their 4 best hitters. They combined for 3 hits. Never gonna work. Never gonna win a game that way.
No, you're just not, and it showed because we didn't score any runs, even though our pitching was outstanding. And I mean, I'll even push back on you saying that Eflin was great in game two because I don't think he was great. I think he was inefficient. I think that he was fine, and I think that he could have kept going. But I was thinking the same thing that Hyde was thinking. I was a little worried about bringing him back out there for the fifth just because I thought he didn't seem like he had his best stuff, and I thought it kind of seemed like there was a little bit of impending doom if he kept going. So I like the move to go straight to the pen early. And our bullpen was fantastic. This is something that we were, really concerned about all season is how is this bullpen going to look in the playoffs? We gave the bullpen the game to start the 5th inning, and they were tremendous. So many pitchers came into tight spots, and they looked great. I mean, from top to bottom, and I know that CNL gave up a run, but overall, this bullpen did a tremendous job.
Cano
And
really battled. Cano
Cano
really
really
battled his
battled.
inning, asked to do an
And
inning a third.
Soto, we were
Yep.
concerned about too, and he was good. So
And
yeah,
Dominguez, also fantastic.
he was great. And so it's just it's disappointing to see such a tremendous pitching effort from what everyone was complaining about, our injuries to our pitching. That's going to be our downfall. They were great, and like you were saying about Hyde, I think I think Hyde did nothing wrong in this playoff series. I liked every move that he made. I mean, the only one that I really questioned was Slater, and Slater had our hardest hit ball in game two.
Yep.
So I just can't see how Hyde would be the one that you point the finger at and blame for this series.
Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you this because a lot of people also have, tried to throw the hitting coaches under the bus. And I wanted to ask you, you've played baseball more than I have, higher levels than I have. What do like I don't think we really talk much about like what do hitting coaches do? Is it more technique focused? Is it more strategy and approach focused? What element of like I don't want to say like psychology, but like mentality is present in their coaching too? Because I really wonder, like, okay, at what level is your when your guys aren't playing up to their talent, who's responsible for that?
Well, I think we've talked about that a little bit on this podcast. I think the role of a hitting coach can differ kind of based on the hitting coach's pedigree. I mean, I remember, and this was a disastrous example when the Marlins hired Barry Bonds to be their hitting coach, and it didn't really work out. I think they fired him after 2 years. But I'm sure when he was their hitting coach, he had almost full autonomy to change whatever he wanted with these hitters' approaches, and it was kind of very hands off by the rest of the front office, I'm sure. But when I look at our group of hitting coaches, I just struggle to believe that it's anything other than messages primarily coming down from this front office and our analytics department. We have a group of young hitting coaches and then our offensive strategy coach, Cody Ashia. I know he was a brief MLB player, but I just, I'm sure that a lot of it is like psychology and building relationships and getting time with them in the cage and applying what the analytics department wants them to do. But ultimately, I think that a lot of what's preached to them in the cage is coming down from this analytics department that we built because they're the one who's kind of looking at the numbers, looking at, swing angle, bat speed, that sort of thing, approach to the zone, timing, and they're charting all this data and stuff. And well, why do you have an analytics department if you don't have people to be the middlemen and kind of apply it to them in a more baseball related sense. And that's what I think the job of these hitting coaches is. So that's why I kind of struggle putting the blame on them as well, just because I don't really think it was necessarily their fault, especially in the playoffs. I think in the regular season, with all those struggles, you could kind of look at it and say, wait, well, maybe the approach was a little bit flawed. But in the playoffs, we were so aggressive swinging at bad pitches. And I just highly doubt that was the message coming from the hitting coaches. And I said this on my Twitter. They might be the scapegoats, but I still don't really know that they were the problem.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good way of putting it. I think I'm a very pro analytics person across sports and baseball, but I do think there can be somewhat of an analysis paralysis when you're trying to communicate all this to players who then have to go stand in this little rectangle box and stare at someone throwing 99 miles an hour fastballs at them. I think it's not necessarily the messages or the messengers. It's just a way of simplifying and streamlining what you're trying to get to these hitters in terms of approach. I think the other thing, and this is the other kind of bone I have to pick with the front office, is you look at what the Royals did this offseason. They spent money. I know the Orioles acquired Corbin Burns, but they didn't spend any money in free agency. They got Craig Campbell, who was not on this postseason roster. And the Royals spent money. They went out and got veteran bats. They went out and got veteran pitchers. And I think that the Orioles' curation of this talent pipeline has been so good and so strong in rebuilding this team that I think looking back to Houston, where Elias and Sig Mejdal were before, is thinking about their willingness to bring in multiple vets, bring in veteran bats into the lineup that can be a calming force, because I think that the presence of a veteran bat can have an even bigger effect than a hitting coach when you're in the heat of the moment and you need to just go up and get some good at bats in. So, and we're gonna have a lot of content for you this offseason. I'm really excited to talk about, offseason preview, free agency, all that stuff. But I think that is a serious thing that the team has to look themselves in the mirror and say, they are all about value, and this analytics approach is very value driven. It's about being efficient with your money and being efficient with your different roster moves. And it does cause a refusal to overpay. Once a player hits a certain, threshold, once negotiating hits a certain point, you're like, you are no longer efficient. But that discounts the intangibles that to me show up in the postseason. And it is why you have to be willing to pay a little bit more, especially when your payroll is as low as it is right now. You have to be willing to pay a little bit more to keep veteran bats. We're going to talk about Anthony Santander. I don't know if he's necessarily who I would think of as, oh, they got to re-sign him as the veteran bat, because he doesn't have the postseason experience that we've been talking about. So I think it's an external player that's got to come in. I'd still love for them to re-sign Tony. We'll talk about that in a future podcast as well. But simply re-signing Santander and calling it a day is would be a very disappointing offseason for me. I think they really need to think about bringing in veteran bats. Who cares if you pay a guy $9 million this year and you don't play him for, eight, and you only play him for, 50% of the regular season games because you want to get at bats for Westberg and for Holiday and for Mayo. That's fine. But having that guy in the clubhouse, having that guy mentoring these younger players has value. We've seen it with a lot of different teams around the league. You can even argue we've seen it in Baltimore over the last couple of years with guys like Adam Frazier, who was not hitting well by the time he was in Baltimore, but it was pretty clear that he had an impact on, the hitters in the clubhouse. So that's really where I looked, and I think it was really apparent in this series the Royals' ability to kind of rally and hit situationally with the veteran bats in their lineup that the Orioles just did not have.
Yeah, and I think it certainly seems like there was a bit of a voice missing in this dugout, and maybe that's something you could fall hide on, because I don't think his decision making was poor, but it does seem like motivation wise or just kind of like approach wise something was a bit lacking in this group. As last year, obviously, the play didn't go as we intended, but it really did seem like Kyle Gibson was a huge presence on that team. And that's not saying like with Kyle Gibson, the veteran has to be your superstar. But I think, having some kind of real established leader who has heard different messages might help this team. Because if you look across the diamond, you look at our lineup, most of this team has only heard one message from one GM, from one manager. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, because I like the guys that we have running the Orioles. But additional outside perspective may help. I mean, we do have Freddie Gonzalez in the dugout, who has been around as well. And obviously Brandon Hyde was on the bench for that Cubs World Series and stuff. But, somewhere else, hearing different cues, different, types of leadership messages may help. And I know there was a lot of ripping, I think, on Twitter about Adley maybe not being the leader that we expected him to be. But I don't think that that's necessarily a third-year player's job to be a clubhouse leader. Like, I kind of think back, especially because there's that video circulating now from the Padres Dodgers series of Manny Machado kind of rallying everyone in the dugout and being a leader. And that wasn't really the Manny Machado that we had when he was younger on the Orioles. I think a lot of people looked at Manny Machado when he was younger as a bit of a diva, a bit of like a guy who was full of himself. And now that he's gotten older, he's kind of gained this new perspective and has chosen to become more of a leader. So I don't think that leadership is necessarily going to come from our group of young guys in the clubhouse. And that's not to say they don't try to motivate each other and they don't try to be successful. I just think, a new voice in some way could help. And that's not me advocating for firing Hyde or firing a hitting coach. I just think something needs to change, and that might be a veteran signing, like we were saying.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of split on how I feel about. We'll talk a lot more about this season on our next podcast. We're going to do a whole regular season recap, but I don't think I'm too critical of the front office for their moves this offseason, considering they had ownership transition. Like, the money is literally changing hands. Who is paying for all these players is literally changing hands. And based on everything I know about David Rubenstein, he was not going to come in and start just throwing money around. He has made his fortune. He was able to buy the Orioles because he was prudent and smart with his money. Now, do I think he's going to be willing to spend a lot more than Angelos because he loves the Orioles and this is basically the swan song of his life, absolutely. Um, but they've got to prove it. He's got to really bring the money this offseason and be willing to say, look, whether it's Burns or a veteran hitter who, I don't know what the free agency looks like off the top of my head, but whether it's Burns or a veteran hitter, okay, maybe X amount would be the ideal, the optimal efficient amount of money to pay this guy, but maybe you pay 125% of 110, 120% of that to the player to make sure that you get him, because if you don't get him, your opponents will, and you might be playing against him throughout the season and later in October. So yeah, I very disappointing loss. It's hard to take any positives out of it. Eflin being on the roster next year is good, but again, like you said, he didn't pitch that well. The best player in the series is not scheduled to be an Oriole next season. That is the fact of the matter, and he's got to be a top priority this offseason. I don't know, Daniel. It was just tough to watch in person, and every moment you felt like they were going to put it together. They struck out. You talked about Cowser's at bat. I didn't feel like there were any big defensive flubs. I felt like Westbrook should have gone to second on that one play. I forget which game it was, but he should have gone to second. That's again another example of a young guy in the infield trying to make a play. Um, I don't know what else you got.
Yeah, I mean, I think you made a great point about not being, too ashamed of this offseason because again, it really appears like in hindsight, Angelo's had all four limbs out the door and the paper just hadn't been signed yet to transition the team over. So it does make a lot of sense when you look back and think, why didn't this team spend a lot of money? Given we have a lot of young talent that we wanted to showcase and try out, in addition to the fact that right, the money was going to be getting paid out by someone new. Um, Disappointing overall. I don't think I fault Westbrook for that one play circling back. I think that that's a tough play any way you slice it. I don't know that he definitely has the out at second. I know that when I was looking at it, I stopped the play at the frame where the ball was hitting his glove. And I mean, Gunnar is not even in the picture yet at second. I know that he's running over there, but I think it's tough to say that he can rely on getting that out at second. And then he makes a great play and throws a strong throw over to first, and it's just Bobby Witt Jr. running, who has like 99th percentile sprint speed, and that probably gets most players in the MLB out, but not him. So, to just unfortunate circumstances, the Royals made some good plays too. Michael Massey made a great diving
Mm-hmm.
play to prevent a hit for us that would have sparked a nice little rally. But I mean, it's gonna take some aging and some new perspective from our younger guys as well. And I know that's what we said last year, but I mean, for guys like Gunnar, for guys like Adley, even Heston was on the team in 2023. Like these guys have now been to the playoffs and they're 0-5 in the playoffs. They gotta hate that. I mean, they gotta go into next year with a little bit of black Air Force energy and be like, we're done. We're done being silly. We're done taking this crap in the playoffs. We want to be a bit of a wrecking ball when it matters.
Yeah, we're done being the young, upstart, exciting team. We're here to be an everyday contender in Major League Baseball. And I think you talked about Hyde and motivation. I think if you need motivation going into the playoffs, especially if you need motivation next year, I have no idea what you're doing in professional sports. If you need motivation after losing 5 playoff games in 2 years, if you need motivation for even just going into the playoffs, I don't think that's something that a manager should have to figure out for his team going into the playoffs. So I think this is really going to light a fire under them. You hope it lights a fire under the front office, and I certainly think it's going to light a fire under the team come next season. Daniel, should we tell the listeners what we have planned for our next couple episodes?
Yeah, certainly. So I know that next episode, we're going to be kind of reflecting back on this past season, talking about some of our favorite moments, just things that struck us throughout the season, team MVPs, hand out some awards too, all that sort of thing. So we'll reminisce on those 162 happy days we had before the two really sad ones, and that'll be good in a different way because today it was a nice little therapy session for Nikhil and I to kind of vent out what we'd been keeping inside, maybe not totally inside, but from you guys at least, our listeners. And then also moving forward, we'll be previewing the off season after the World Series and trying to see how we can make this roster better. I don't think there's a lot of holes on this roster, but I think maybe talent wise, there's not a lot of holes, but experience wise, there might be. So that's what we'll be looking at.
Yeah, I'm excited to do that regular season recap with you. Even more excited for the offseason. We're going to talk about the Orioles, the many decisions the Orioles have to make with their impending free agents. Daniel's going to go back down in the minor leagues and give us another update from the farm, and where the minor leagues stand going into the offseason. And then as free agency gets closer, the winter meetings get closer, we're going to talk more and more about maybe some potential trades the Orioles could go after, and certainly some signings that we're going to pound the table for in the offseason. So thanks so much for listening. We really enjoyed doing this over the second half of the season. We're looking to more, even though it was a disappointing end of the year, we're looking forward to bring you more through the rest of the year. Thanks so much for joining me, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you guys. Like and subscribe, please.
1,